if you are talking to your friends in your network, or colleagues, you might find out about that job before it's even up. So it's always worth reaching out to your network and saying, I'm looking, or do you know anything? We worked with the client I mentioned before, the one that we wanted to leave a job after 20 years. He had an excellent network, and the first 6 emails that he sent off to his network to say, I'm looking for something, out of those 6, 4 of them replied saying, hang on, let's have a call. And then 2 of them had leads. And then from that, he had interviews in some jobs that weren't even up yet. So it's possible for sure.
Welcome back to the Career Therapy Podcast, where we help you navigate the emotional and promotional sides of the job search so you can change careers with confidence. My name is Martin McGovern, founder and lead coach at Career Therapy, and I'm excited to introduce our guest today. Please welcome Dina Grishin to the podcast. Dina is a life and career coach based in London, coaching worldwide. And after navigating herself out of a quarter-life crisis, which saw her changing jobs every year to find her calling, Dina now helps others who are stuck get clarity on their dream job and figure out how to get there. Today, we discuss how to navigate a quarter-life crisis, how to shift from passions to interests in our job search, and what hidden details you need to know about the hiring process to get an edge up on the competition and find the right role for you. Thank you for tuning into this episode and supporting the show. Please like, subscribe, share, and enjoy this conversation with Dina Grishin. All right, Dina, I really appreciate you joining us today. There's this word that I love that you use in your work of crisis. And I think we were chatting before the call here about how a lot of people don't tend to reach out to a coach or reach out for help until things are already in crisis. And I think that's a really interesting place for us to start today, because when it comes to getting help, sometimes trying to fix things or navigate something new while everything is sort of at its worst point can be pretty tough, right? The best time to get a job, they say, or to look for a job is when you already have a job. But that's not typically when people reach out for help, right? They reach out when they're like, I needed a job 3 months ago. I'm stressed. Yeah. I'm going broke. Everything's in a rough spot. So what do you typically see with your clients when it comes to the different types of career crises that arise? Like, what are the different signs or, variations in crises that you see with people that you work with?
Yes, very good question. And also, thank you for having me on this podcast. Of course.
Thank you for being here.
And really happy to be here. So it depends on the person as well, and like how they are with crises. I am quite dramatic and vocal and open. So when I was having my quarter-life crisis, I was like, oh my God, this is an existential crisis. I am like, I'm in doomland. I'm at rock bottom every single 6 months. So that was me, and I was quite vocal. So I do hear people being like, really vocalizing how they're so lost and they don't know what they're doing and everything's kind of falling apart. There's those kind of people and that kind of crisis. And then there's another one, which is a more quiet and a subtle one. And it's when people are bored. They don't feel like they're developing. They feel like it's the same old and the same old. And that crisis is almost a little bit worse for them, because nothing might be like acutely wrong. Their company can be taking care of them. They go on holidays, they have a partner or something, but it's just that their days are like full of boredom, and there is a distinct lack of growth and excitement, but they're comfortable. So it makes it really hard to make that change, because saying goodbye to comfort is hard. And, I feel for them as well. I get those kind of crises.
I love that. I love the breakdown there, because there's the golden handcuff sort of piece, right? It's like things aren't terrible, but I'm not in a good spot. And I think what's so interesting about our careers and our lives and how interwoven they are is that, whenever I'm working with people, I'm always keeping an ear open to being like, is this actually a problem with your job? or is this a problem with your life, or is this just a way that you're thinking about things, right? Because not everyone needs to change jobs necessarily. Or I'll see people, they'll work with me, they will get a new job, and then 6 months later they're in the same spot in the new job because it wasn't the job that was the problem. It's how they're thinking about the interaction of their life, their job, and how it all kind of goes together. um what have you sort of seen? Like, is it, when it comes to that, like, sense of malaise, let's say, um what are the different combinations, of like life and job and the overlap, and how we can maybe take a step back, because maybe we put too much blame on any one thing. What are maybe some of the different things that we can do to get perspective on our problems when we feel like we're stuck or bored or overwhelmed in these different situations?
Mm. Being completely biased, I would say coaching is a great one for different perspective, for sure, because yeah, there's nothing quite replaces having, like, an hour call where there's undivided attention on you and someone getting to know you really well, and someone who isn't, like, friend, family, or colleague, and they can just start questioning the subtleties of how you're thinking. I mean, I love getting coached myself, so I think that is for sure. The other one that is super, super powerful is stories, like learning from other people's stories, and be that in groups, like what you provide with group coaching, or just through workshops. I think one of the reasons my quarter life crisis webinar that you found as well is so useful is because I share my experience of my quarter life crisis, and I give concrete examples, and I also let people in on how I was thinking and feeling. And when people connect and they're like, oh my God, that is me as well, they can then place themselves on where I was on my timeline, and then see what I did next, or how I looked at the situation differently and how I acted. And that gives them real, like, inspiration and thinking, oh, okay, yeah, me too. I've got a toxic boss. And that's what you did. You actually didn't see it as a toxic boss. You were like, this was a sign for me that I needed to leave the company. That's all it was. It was like the universe coming down and being like, you have outgrown this job. It's too comfortable. You need to leave. Otherwise, I would have stayed in that company because it was quite cushy forever and ever. But then I got a horrible boss, and that was a gift.
Right? A horrible boss can be a gift. That's such a great way to look at it. And I do want to dig a little bit into your story and your experience, because it is such an interesting thing to have those inflection points in your career. And you were chatting again before the call about like how you started coaching before there was a problem. And a lot of times we wait until the world's on fire before we reach out for help. That's kind of the pull yourself up by your bootstraps way, right? And so what was your early experience with coaching when things were actually not in peril? What was that like? And was it, how was it helpful, and how was it different than when things were actually, when fires were starting up? Like, what was that transition? How did it look?
Yes. Well, I'll gladly share the experience that I had. I hired a coach, someone that I had already worked with before, because everything was really, really good. I was in my dream job, which was I was head of coaching for this startup, this career accelerator program, and I was coaching creatives day in, day out. I also had my own coaching team. I was doing workshops. I was coaching at events, literally my dream job. And so because things were good, I wanted to get coached and develop further and develop kind of my leadership. And also, I just love the experience of being coached because you never know your blind spots. And that was a nice experience because I am an absolute SWOT and a teacher's pet. I'm also going to get my money's worth. So I had notes. I started up a document, which I shared with my coach. It was all my own initiative. And I put in before our session the focus of the session. I did write-ups. I could really reflect and have time to do kind of the homework in between. So lovely. We grew. I always had something to talk about. And then suddenly the company I was at, started making redundancies. And so the conversations went from how do I become a great leader to what does self-employed life look like? How do I view myself as a self-employed coach? Kind of what invisible barriers am I putting up with myself, and all of that. And it was so good to have someone there when suddenly I was like panicking, and she because she knew me, she could remind me of my strengths, and also, step into a bit of a mentoring relationship, which I did value at that time so well. So then with crisis, coaching became a lot more frequent because things were changing every single week. But it was so amazing to have someone on your team, like someone there who's going to see you through that crisis and who doesn't see it as a crisis and sees it as an opportunity, and who's been there themselves as well. I think that's really important, kind of when looking for a coach or looking for or a mentor, anyone. You want to pick someone who's been there and has like that wisdom and experience that you get from having lived through redundancies, being self-employed, and the rest of that.
Yeah.
And that was my experience.
That's awesome. And when it comes to like that identity shift, it is so cool that you had someone who already knew you, right, before the crisis arose. Because I think sometimes when we are in the middle of that shift, when we're like, okay, everything needs to change, I need to get my life on track, we go through an identity crisis. And I see this all the time with people where they're like, I know this isn't right. I don't know what is. So here's the 50 different options that I've just come up with off the top of my head of what my life could look like. And then we go into like dream world for a little bit and have to bring it back to reality, right? And it is almost this, and I talk about identity a lot on this podcast, because I do think that the way that the world is set up right now, our career identity is we spend so much time at work that it just gets so interwoven with our personal identity. I'd prefer that not to be the case for more people, but it is the case for most people. And so in your shift here, you went from, I think like there's a lot of talk online of you're either an entrepreneur or you're a 9-to-5er, and everything gets like put into these sort of this or that binary categories. And you're a prime example of someone who's like, no, I was crushing it in my 9-to-5 and I'm crushing it as an entrepreneur. And that shift is something that I had to navigate and come to terms with, but you did it with help. And so what was that identity shift like for you? Was it a difficult one, or was it fairly like fluid because you were already putting in that work?
Really good question. That really good question, and that's something I do work with my clients as well. And when I kind of talk about what I do, I say you can find your dream job in a 9-to-5 and working for yourself. It's not an either or. You're not like a born entrepreneur or a born manager or something like that. We're talking about identity. For me, I'm quite actually a visual person. I remember my coach saying, picture yourself as, a self-employed person. And I couldn't picture myself. And then she said, picture yourself as a professional coach. And what came to mind when I said professional coach, I had this image of me in a corporate suit and, coaching C-suite executives, all of that. And I did not connect to that image. I was like, that's not me. And therefore I cannot be self-employed, because we all have these images of what it is to be a professional self-employed or successful. And then we just played with the wording a little bit. And she said, okay, picture yourself as a creative entrepreneur. And then boom, I connected. I was like, oh, okay, so I don't have a uniform. I can be creative. I can work with creative brands and organizations. And that suddenly I got an image of what I was going to be like and how I would show up. So I think imagery is really important, or at least dissecting and pulling back what image or visual you have in your head of, say, 9-to-5 life or entrepreneur life. Actually, there was a lady I was coaching who had always been in more creative industries and worked in contracts, worked for herself, and she was going through a transition period. And during that time, she needed some stability. So she was like, I got a my nightmare situation, which was a 9-to-5 job. I thought I was never meant for the corporate life or 9-to-5, but someone said there's a good job going there, and I went for it. And actually, that was one of the best jobs I had, because they had boundaries, they had a great culture, and all the rest. So sometimes we have an image of what an organization or a life is like, and it's not based on truth. So I think part of our job as coaches is to really unpick what is behind that, that assumption, or what image our clients have. Yeah,
that's such a great point, because it really is true. We have these movies in our mind, right? We have these, and a lot of times it is based on movies. It's like, I'll talk to people and they'll be like, oh, I want to be a lawyer. I'm like, do you actually want to be a lawyer? Or did you just watch Suits recently? And they're like, no, I want to be in advertising. I'm like, do you actually like advertising, or did you just watch Mad Men? Like, and sometimes a big piece of what I do is I try and get people away from like websites that are trying to push you into things like, oh, you should be a web developer because they make a lot of money, and now go sign up for this program and like pay all this money. And then all of a sudden halfway through, they don't want to do it anymore. And I'm always like, if you haven't met people who are actually doing the job, like real people who are in it on a daily basis, you probably don't have a clear image or a realistic image in your mind of what it is. I remember when I first started getting into coaching, and I thought it was kind of gross. I was like, I don't know about this coaching thing. Right?
Totally.
I was like, yeah.
We want these sales people. Yeah. Totally.
Yeah. I was like, I'm a marketer. That's a real thing. And I went and talked to a bunch of coaches, and I'm like, oh, wait, I get along with you. Like you're a chill person. And and the same thing when I started getting into like, I'm going to be going back to school to become a therapist. And I'm like, oh, like I can actually go see what they look like and like hear them complain about their work and like hear them be excited about their work and like get the full picture. And that really, getting that full picture is such an important piece, because like you said, with the woman you coached, like she was like, I'm not a 9-to-5er. And I hear that all the time from people. And I'm like, are you not a 9-to-5er, or did you just have one bad experience at one company? Because there's thousands of different companies, right? And I always think that that ability to be a chameleon and go back and forth between things is probably one of the best strengths for someone's career, because then you're always finding opportunities. And it almost reminds me of something I talked about once, where it's like, instead of going from employed to unemployed, because unemployed is such a terrible identity to put on, it's like, go from unemployed to self-employed, and then maybe back to, or sorry, not unemployed, go from employed to self-employed. And then if you want to go back to a 9-to-5, go back to employed. And then you can like play around with those different identities. But what are some exercises that you maybe lead people through? Maybe it's networking, maybe it's like, vision boarding. I don't know what your process is, but like, what are some of the things that you've done to help people get a more realistic picture of who they are today and who they could be in the future? Because I think we struggle with the image of the future, but we also struggle with the image of today. And if we don't believe that we can do it, how are we going to convince other people that we can do it, right? And so how do you sort of help people get out of their insecurities and into something that's more realistic around their career?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you just touched upon is so true. The narrative, like we have to first of all have a story or narrative about what happened and who we are, that we identify with and we're proud of before we go out into the open world. Because using your network is so useful. There's so many jobs out there that are within the network that people just know about that aren't on the jobs boards yet. So utilizing your network is really useful. However, people are scared of using their network because they don't know what they're asking for. And to know what they're asking for, they need to then kind of have a debrief of what's been, as you pointed out, like clear out. Was it just one situation that happened in this job that's put you off this career, or was it multiple? So I do have a process, like step by step, because what I heard someone, this was a webinar I was on, where they said career coaching is very different from any other coaching out there. With leadership or any other coaching, that people come in, they know what they're working on. They say, I want to achieve this goal. I want to move countries. I want to, start my own company, things like that. But within career coaching, they don't know what they want. They just say, I don't think I want this. I want something else. Go. So it's completely different kind of coaching. So I find it really helps to have a process. So we start off with the pillars, the clarity pillars I have are, we look at their strengths, their values, and their interests. And right at the beginning, I start off with getting their life story. So I get to know them and their life story of, where they went to uni, their parents, what they did, that their first job, second jobs, how often they changed jobs, the reasons why they changed jobs. That first session which is a big one, and we go into detail, is so, so useful, because I can see decision making, I can see the influences of my clients. That is really useful. And then we go on to strengths, because I don't know about you, I think you probably have this as well with your clients. People just can't talk about their strengths. They think they're being big-headed, showing off, being arrogant. And you really have to, I make my clients work and say, you know, look in the past. What did you get from this job? What are you good at? And remind them also, soft skills, people skills are some of the most useful and are your strengths, right? You know, a lot of things can be taught. You can teach people so many things right now, but your soft skills aren't taught. They're developed over time. So strength is a big one. So they get reminded of who they are. And as we're working through this, we're building up a narrative of why they made their choices and what has come up, benefits have come through with making those choices. The values is what's important to them, so that we know kind of it's a decision-making shortcut. These are values, and this is what we're going to be focused on for the next year or two. And then interests. So we look at their interests rather than their passion or their purpose, because I find asking someone what their purpose is such a big question that it shuts down thinking completely. Then they answer like, oh, world peace, of course, you know. Like something big that sounds like really good and noble. So I don't put that pressure on my clients. I also don't ask about passion, because I remember when I was trying to navigate my quarter-life crisis, and I went to so many workshops about finding out what you want to do, or career change ones. And whenever they said we do like a group exercise, and they say, okay, so write down your passions, and I go absolutely blank, and I'd be like, well, if I knew what I was passionate about, then I'd be doing it. And you write things like, I don't know, food, fun, friends, travel, like all the things that everyone else is probably passionate about. And you think, how am I making a career out of that? So not passion, not purpose, interests, right? No pressure, just what your interests are. And then, we kind of go on hypothesis, like, well, let's run with a few things. And that's kind of my process. And then we run with a few things. And as they're taking action and networking and really kind of talking to people, it will come through what they're most passionate about. And they've got questions to ask their network. So then they get a realistic perspective, or some hypotheses that they're testing of being, X or Y, get struck off because they spoke to someone. They're like, oh no, that sounds awful. I'm not going to make that career change. So that is my process.
I love it. And there's so many pieces in there that I want to dig into. The first one is the soft skills piece that you talked about. So you're 100% right. Like, people really struggle to call out their strengths. And whenever I ask people what their strengths and weaknesses are, you always get the generic answers like, well, I love solving problems. And my joke is always back to that, like, cool, do you want to walk a dog, like someone's dog, because that solves a problem? And they're like, no, I solve these problems. And I'm like, all right, now we're getting somewhere. Let's get specific, right? Because that's what a job is. A job is just solving a problem. Like, that's every job. And I really appreciate that you talked about interests over passion and purpose, because aside from those things just being overused on the internet, it really does shut people down. And I think, to the point of, the topic of our episode today, when you're in a crisis, it's hard to also like find your passion. I love how we're like, not only should you find a job, which is difficult enough, but you should find a job that has a purpose and that you're passionate about, and that you'll never not like, and that you'll never have a bad day. And every day your head should pop off the pillow. And if it's not, then you're failing. And like all this stuff, it's like, no, just, can you be slightly interested in it more than something else? And the interest piece I really like, because for some reason there's this sort of mentality that gets put in us somehow throughout our life and our careers, where if we're not like in pain at work, we're not doing it right. And a lot of people have this sort of view that, like, if I enjoy what I'm doing and it comes easy to me, then I'm not working hard enough. And I'm not sure what, I'm sure there's like a ton of psychology behind that we could dig into. But there's this sort of, when I'll ask someone, I'll be like, so what are your interests? And they'll be like, oh, I really like sports, or I really like music, or I really like history, or whatever the thing might be. And there's, of course, tech companies that focus on all of those things that they could potentially work at. But they're like, no, I probably should go into like a financial company because I don't like finance. And if it feels like I'm struggling, then I'm doing a good job. And I'm like, you don't have to feel like you're struggling. So I really appreciate you talking about those interest pieces. What are different interests that you've seen people share? What's maybe, because when there's so much around the passion and the purpose stuff that everyone's out there, like, every company is saving the world. Every person is trying to change. My joke is always like, don't try to change the world if your customer service is terrible. Like, just get good at customer service. So what's an example of like some interests that you've helped people discover so that people can maybe have a more practical view of the difference between an interest and like this passion purpose stuff?
Absolutely. I'll get to that question. I just want to rewind to what you said earlier, because I think it was so just useful to mention how jobs feel and how we make them feel. And I think people sometimes don't let themselves go for something that feels easy. And I see this a lot with my creative clients. And one like self-employed photographers or anyone kind of within the creative sphere. I've coached artists as well. What happens is they end up not charging much or at all when they start, because they think, well, this came easy to me, so I can't possibly charge. Like, this was just a pure pleasure for me to do, so I can't charge, it's okay. Or they'll charge really low. And it's because I think when we've grown up from our parents, or maybe also from movies, what we saw a lot was this story, this narrative of, someone comes home, the man or the woman comes home from work, and they're like exhausted. They like plonk on the sofa, like Homer Simpson's, or plonk on the sofa, absolutely can't do anything else, and like work has tired them out. So that goes into our subconscious as a kind of a criteria that we should go for. We should be working ourselves to the bone and be exhausted at the end of the day. That means we're doing an honest day's work. If it's easy, if we've got energy left over, we must be doing something wrong. And so I think that narrative goes in terms of how work feels. And it was such a good point that you brought up, because I think it is worth talking about how work feels. And we can let it be easy, but we have this guilt that comes up, and that's the work we should be working on within our coaching, the feelings around letting it be easy, the guilt and everything else like that. But in terms of interests, I've had some all over the board. I had, what was it, last year or the year before was one of the pandemic years, and they all merged into one. I had the clients I was working with who'd been in their industry for 20 years. And so they were like, what do I know? Like, what good am I to anyone? And so I spent a long time, getting to know them and seeing what their strengths are. And then their interest was literally, with one I remember, was interior design. And I could see on his Instagram, what he appreciated, because he traveled quite a lot. He hotel interior design and other things. He just put that up. And, when I asked about that, how about working with somewhere within design? He dismissed it because he's like, well, I'm not creative. I have never created anything. Again, dismissing those avenue parts. I was like, well, you don't need to. You can bring in your strength and your amazing experience of 2 decades of doing this kind of job, brand partnerships, into the design world. Like that easy thing. Kind of other interests, personal development, I'm hearing a lot as well. People say, I've got this interest in psychology, therefore I must do psychology degree. That's something that I always hear, I've got this interest, so I need to do a degree. And I'm like, and then what? First of all, tell me, what elements do you like of it? You could be working for a personal development company or a training company. And I'll tell you, I had one. So one client came to me and she was like that. She was a manager working within marketing, and she noticed that she wasn't as interested in marketing, and she was more interested in her team and developing her team. And so she thought, well, I'm going to become a coach. I have to get some coach training. So she first came to me and asked me to help her navigate which coach training to go for. And I was like, well, before we do that, let me sit down and just kind of unpick the reasons and see what you think about, coaching. And actually turned out, I was like, well, look, I work with some clients for 3 months, maybe 6 months, because I remember her saying that she really liked seeing people develop and seeing how they didn't have courage, and then they stuck their hand up in a meeting room and other things like that, like really tracking kind of and seeing and being witness to their development. I was like, I don't see any of that, by the way. As a coach, we talk, but what they're like in that boardroom, in that meeting room, I don't see any of that. So you're not going to see the very thing that makes you happy. How do you feel about that? And she was like, oh yeah, I didn't think of that, So actually what it turned out is, I recommended her a training program and a book and like a whole approach that she could use as a manager. And she fell in love with it and, did that. So sometimes the answer isn't doing a whole PhD in something that you're interested in. It's just seeing how you can work it into your everyday life. And to the point that you brought up right at the beginning is sometimes you don't need to leave your job. You just need to bring in your interests.
We interrupt today's episode to let you know about Career Therapy's Unstuck coaching program. If you're feeling paralyzed by job search procrastination and unsure of what to do next in your career, we're here to help. Each month as a member, you will get access to 2 one-on-one coaching calls, unlimited virtual chat with your coach via Slack, invitations to bi-weekly group coaching sessions, and lifetime access to our 8-part job search curriculum. Want to take your search to the next level? Head over to careertherapy.com and schedule a free 15-minute consultation to chat with me today and see if coaching is right for you. Now back to our show. I appreciate you bringing up the guilt piece, because I do think that is something that people struggle with so much. And there's almost like 2 threads we have going here, and I'm like going to keep bouncing back and forth between them. What you were just saying there, it's like, something doesn't feel right. We come up with an idea of what the answer could be. Then we make that an identity very quickly and start like trying to find like the next step, right? Without assessing it or putting that up, against the sunlight and seeing if it's real, right? And I'm a huge fan of slow changes over time. Like kind of when I got into coaching, I resisted it quite a bit. I did like free coaching for like 3 years for people, not even realizing I was coaching until someone called me a coach. And I was like, oh, okay. And then I had to like sit with it for a year. I was like, do I like this? And I still did like marketing consulting and like these other things. And I've been interested. I mean, my company's called Career Therapy. So clearly I've been interested in therapy for a very long time. And I'm only just now like making that transition. And I think sometimes people want everything all at once. They want their whole career, their whole life, every aspect of it, from their personal life to their relationships, to their job, to everything, to all change at the same time. And you can see this in just like, all right, you want to change your job. They're like, well, I want to change my title and my industry and work remote. And it's like, you're changing everything about your job instead of like, maybe just change the title first, but stay in the same industry, or maybe change the industry, but keep the same title, or maybe go remote with the same role in the same industry and then build from there. And these incremental changes that actually lead to what I sort of see as a much longer term success or happiness or better outcome for people, rather than these like fits and stops, like starts and stops, where people are like, oh, I tried to be a lawyer and that didn't work. Okay, now I'm in debt and now I have to go get this other job. And, I think that sometimes that's maybe this pressure to like have the answer, but also this guilt that like we're not doing enough. And so we have to make some big, grand change. And I appreciate how you talked about, the slow process of like working with someone, and maybe even working with them before they are under the pressure to make a decision, so that you can think through these things before the deadline comes. And I was reading a book, and in it they said, your job is not actually your job. Your job is to get the next job in your career. And I thought that was such an interesting perspective on it, because in order to get the next job, you should probably do a good job at your job. So it's not ignore your job or like be bad at your job. It's just, you should always be thinking about the next role and looking out for that next opportunity. And what that does is it keeps you from getting too bogged down in the day-to-day, because you at least have like an antenna up saying like, there's going to be something else. If this is stressing me out, that's okay, because there is another way to go and I will find it. And you have like that confidence in yourself because you've built that skill of job transitioning. And so kind of bringing it back around Well, I'm going to pause there. Do you have any, because I'm like just going off on tangents here, but are there any thoughts that you have about that sort of long-term perspective versus short-term changes, and how to maybe balance those two mindsets? Because we have to do both, right? But like, how can we contextualize that in a way that's healthy or beneficial, or really doesn't, stress people out?
Really good. And I am the same as you. I like slow changes over time. And it can be hard to keep reminding yourself that actually you do like it, because, you'll see on Instagram, someone's like, and in two years, I'm a multi-millionaire, whatever, shot to fame. But, you don't, then they're off your radar. And then in 4 years' time, you'll be buying their burnout problem.
Yeah. So
We
true.
don't track that, but like slow change for sure. And the reason I always question, if someone's like, I need to leave immediately, what you were saying before, is what they don't realize is that something's come up, something unpleasant of feeling, disappointment, frustration, or one of those unpleasant feelings, and they just want the feeling to go away. And therefore, that's why that change has to come immediately. But, it's like a Band-Aid. You'll make the frustration go away, but you'll get that again. I think the life lesson will keep on repeating itself to you until you actually learn. So in that situation, what you have to do is, maybe it's something else. It's actually training the skill, getting the skill of communicating your needs and asking your manager. And I work with clients a lot on that, because they say, oh, my manager will never listen. This will never happen. And I go, but that doesn't mean you don't try, because this is for you a whole lesson in communicating and finding a way to maybe get your manager to listen. If they don't, that's fine, but you've at least tried, and then you can go on and find a job. But you do have to build that skill. So everything is an opportunity. And I do like what you said about keeping an eye out on another job. Some people would say not, I think there's a Will Smith quote that says, don't have a plan B, because that will distract you from plan A. And that might be right for him. But I think the world of work, it's always good I've still got my LinkedIn on, and I still look there for my clients, but also for myself, because there's so many new exciting companies that are being sprouting up everywhere. And so, yeah, there are opportunities. And I think if you do keep an eye out on other places, you'll see opportunities, or you'll see, opportunities to collaborate, not even, jump ship, for example. But it's good to be aware of kind of your environment and see what's out there. So I am with you on that one, for sure.
Well, and I appreciate you bringing up that like no plan B piece, because that is like one of those phrases that gets repeated a lot. And I think in the case of Will Smith is an interesting example. Despite all the recent controversy, which we will just gloss over. But like, even Will Smith, like, he was a rapper, but he was like keeping an ear open for acting roles. And then when he was an actor, he was keeping an ear open for movie roles. And then when he was an action star, he was keeping an ear open for dramatic roles. And then when he was in dramatic roles, he was keeping an ear open for potentially Oscar-winning roles, and then he slapped someone. But anyway, but clearly a stressful lifestyle that they live. But there's this other idea that kind of pops up here of like using some of these moves to avoid things. And I tend to, people get really worried about their skill set, like you mentioned earlier, and you talked about soft skills being the most useful strengths sometimes. And the way I look at that, because I work with people who are doing big career transitions, like from teacher to coder, or from musician to UX designer, flip those two. It's usually teacher to UX. And anyway, but they tend, when they go out into the market, they're really worried that they don't have the technical skills, and that they're not going to get the job because they don't have the technical skills. And I have to keep reminding them that the majority of your job is just not being a crappy employee. And then you, with enough time and access to Google, can you look up these things and figure it out? Like, especially cybersecurity. Like, whenever I do an alumni event with cybersecurity students, they're all like, I don't think I'm, technically good enough. And every single alumni is just like, dude, the senior people are still Googling stuff. Like it changes so quickly. We have no idea what's happening. And yeah, it's hilarious. And one of the things, it's like, are you just going to be like, are you going to make everyone else around you, are you going to make that project hell while you're Googling things, or are you going to make it easy and flow well while you're Googling things? Like, I like to just think of it that way.
Yeah.
And what I tend to see is people, when they're scared about those technical lackings, they reach out for school or education or certification or anything like that. And I've seen people get into this mode of like, what I like to call productive procrastination. I'm going to go get another degree and another boot camp and another certification. And 10 years later, they're still getting education and they've never had a job. And I tend to tell people like, can you do this job in like a micro setting? Can you do like a sprint of it? Or can you do a small entrepreneurial project or a volunteer project or something just to see if you like it, if you're good at it? Like when I think back to the early days of my coaching, before I even understood that I was coaching, I would just meet up with people. I would just hang out. Like I'd go to a meetup, a marketing meetup. And then afterward, I would sit and talk with someone about their career for like 3 hours, just because I thought it was fascinating. And then I'd be at work and my boss would open up to me about all the things that she's struggling with work. And I'm like, I don't think this is a conversation we should be having, but let's go, whatever. And like, you know, just realizing like, oh, wait a second. Like if I do those things already, and I can, if I formalize it and put it into a structure, then it can actually become something real. Like giving yourself that opportunity. Let's say you want to be a designer. Instead of going back to school to get a design degree, like create one logo for one small business somewhere and see how it goes. Like maybe it doesn't go well, and then you can like bypass that whole expenditure. But what other ways do you see people avoiding the things that they should be doing? Because there's a lot of shoulds out there, right? And people know that they should be doing a lot of things, but then they get stuck in this sort of maybe avoidance cycle. Are there any things that you've seen people do that kind of increase their avoidance, or have you seen anything that's helped people stop avoiding things and start confronting and dealing with what they need to work on?
One of the most common avoidance things I've seen is going on holiday. That's when people are in a job that they don't like, you know, they'll get to this period where they're like, oh my God, I can't stand it. And then the holiday comes up, or it's a company summer party and they get, you know, lavished with free drinks and free everything. And then for a while, their frustration abates and it's absolutely fine. Or they go on holiday and they're relaxed, like this is just great. And so that is one common avoidance tactic, jumping from relief activities that bring relief, holidays, going away, or parties or something like that. That is an avoidance, I'd say. I love what you said about kind of creative procrastination, because my coach called me out. I did that a lot. I used to go on workshops and read books and just fill up my diary with learning. And then he was like, you're going to have to move into the doing. And that was scary. And I was like, but I just need one more thing to do. And that the going into the doing is the scariest thing. And so people do put it off until, especially with those who are transitioning from full-time employment to say self-employed, putting off the website, that becomes like a big focus. No, I can't do anything with that website, or I need to do my blurb first or something else like that. So they always have something that they have to do first and get perfect before they go out into the world. But it is, what I do is I push them out early. There was someone who one of the tactics I used, I mean, this is pre-COVID, so this was out in the real world. I say, when they have become what they are doing, like they're in the early stages, I say, make a business card of it. And go to a networking event that you don't even care about. It doesn't have to be in your sector. It can be completely different, and start, you know, introducing yourself as that person, as a designer, and giving out your business card. You know, you don't have to have a business card. It makes it a little bit more real, but introducing yourself as that person and seeing how it feels. So this is obviously going back to our identity piece, but making it real, like saying out loud, yeah, I'm a designer. and I can probably help you, things like that. So it is scary going to networking events, but I find them the best thing ever. And a lot of the time, in the end, once people have done it, gone out, put themselves outside their comfort zone, spoken to a stranger, they realize it's not as painful as they thought it was going to be. And people are nice.
People are way nicer than you give them credit, for sure,
Yeah.
especially when in the networking thing. People are so scared of networking. And I used to be, but it's like, it's so funny when you look back, and even the bad experiences where it was like an awkward conversation, or like, I didn't know what to say and I blanked, like even those conversations, I reach back out to those people years later and they either don't remember it or they never even noticed it in the first place. I always like tell this story about how I ordered hot chocolate at Starbucks because I didn't understand what coffee was. And in my head, I was like, I'm screwing up my career. And the other person like didn't even notice. And so like, oh, to be in college again. And so, but you're saying so many things. And like, one thing in particular is that owning the title before you have someone else put it on you, I think is also important. I work with a lot of people who are in boot camps and they're like, I'm an aspiring cybersecurity professional. I'm an aspiring UX designer. I'm an aspiring, or I'm trying to break into the UX industry. I'm like, you're not aspiring to anything. You're in the class. You're already in the industry. Like the first step is to learn the skill. Everyone's first step is to learn the skill. And if you're learning the skill, you're already the thing. You're the lowest tier of that thing and you're in the education phase, but you're in the phase. You're in step one. And so trying to get people to actually be like, I am a cybersecurity professional. I am a designer. It's like, if you've designed one thing, you're technically a designer. Keep designing, keep improving, but like own the name in the short term. Because if we don't own it, how are we going to sell it? Right? Like how, and you see companies do this all the time, right? They don't even have a product that they've built, but they start advertising it to see if there's any interest in it. And if there's enough interest, then they go build it, but they won't build it if there's not that initial interest. And so sometimes we have to do that. We have to take those marketing and sales tactics and put them into play for ourselves, or you know, maybe it's fake it till you make it, maybe it's whatever, but we have to sort of lead with some confidence to instill that confidence. And I think that's, you know, dropping that aspiring is huge. And you also mentioned from a mental perspective, when we're in a job and we take that vacation or something, there's 2 points I want to make here. One is I see people come back from vacation all the time and they expect it to have an epiphany, or they go travel the world and they expect an epiphany and they come back and they're like, I didn't have my epiphany. And they're like really upset about it. And I'm like, well, of course not, because you were just like focused on making it to the bus or making it to the beach or making it to like, where's the time? Like epiphanies happen, like you said, when we get into the doing. When we do something and we get real feedback from that thing, that's where the epiphanies happen, not from being in Europe for some random, or I mean, you're in Europe, not coming to America anyway, but like those are just, that's just a funny aside. But even deeper than that, you talked about how like one good day, like that day where you have drinks with your company and the frustration abates. That reminds me, I was having a conversation with a therapist recently about toxic relationships and how like the baseline of the relationship can be awful, but you have one really good day, or you go on vacation and have like a few good days. And those few good days put like a kind of a pin in hope up here that someday all days will be like that. And then we stop looking for the other opportunities. And that's how people can get stuck in toxic situations. And I think careers and relationships are very similar in a lot of ways. And one of them is that like, well, I had that one really good meeting, so this job's not so bad. And then 3 months later, they're like, this job is the worst thing ever. I should have been searching this whole time. What have you sort of seen as like telltale signs of a toxic environment that people should be paying attention to so that they don't hit the point of crisis, or they can like be ready when the crisis comes, let's say?
The ones, just to say everything you always say, I'm like, oh my God, I want to
you go
come back to it, but then I forget until you ask me the last question. But in terms of telltale signs, the company culture, and that is in, does your boss have time for you? There's so many clients I've been coaching recently who have problems or have been hired and just, thrown into the deep end. And this is actually something I look out for in job descriptions when, we're dissecting them with my clients, is when they say someone who can hit the ground running. And sometimes it's a good thing. Other times they're like, it's code for, like, we are so short-staffed that we will not have time to, onboard you or train you. You'll just be figuring out as you go along. That could be exciting, but in nowadays when we're remote working or hybrid working, you won't have some colleague in your office. You might not be in an office to have someone to just ask for help with. So you'll be in your own room or co-working space, going through hell trying to be like, what did they ask me to do? Where is that folder? And then your boss is too busy to make time for you to explain that. I'm seeing that a lot. So if someone's really busy and just doesn't have time for you, how's that going to change? If the leadership is like that, then they don't believe in hiring enough people so that you can cope. That is, I think, one of the biggest telltale signs that I'm seeing a lot of, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, it's huge. And it's tough to figure that out too, because the hiring process is so messy and there's it's like hiring by committee, and there's so many interviews now, and they take weeks to get back to you in between. Like, if sometimes people are like, well, if they don't respond within 24 hours, then I'm not going to keep going with the process. I'm like, boy, we're never going to get an interview. like every single company takes like a week to get back to you. And then there's like the outliers that are amazing. But I do think that that's, again, where we come back to that networking piece. Like, the best way to find out what a culture is like is to go talk to a handful of people that work there, or even better, some people that don't work there anymore, who have quit or been fired, and like get that inside scoop. Like, that's even better. But if, I'll see people ask the question, like, what's the culture like at the end of the interview? And this person's currently representing the company and being paid by the company to represent the company. They're not going to say it's a crappy culture. They're going to go, it's amazing. And I've had so many people that I've worked with who have been on the hiring side who are like, oh, if I could just tell this person to run, oh my gosh. Yeah. But I can't say that in the interview. I have to just interview them because that's my job. And it's just like, oh my goodness, it's weird to be in this like coaching position and like be kind of separate from it and see the whole picture of how hard it can be for folks. And maybe this is a good time to just break down like the nitty gritty of the job search. What are some of the things that people should know about the job search process that maybe aren't as obvious to an outsider, to someone that's just starting their job search? Like, what are some of the things, the assumptions that people have that are incorrect, or the hidden details that maybe they wouldn't know about if they weren't as close to it? What are the things that you see that would be the most helpful for someone who's just starting up their job search to understand, so that they don't go in with maybe the wrong expectations?
Oh, absolutely. That the job description is a wish list. You don't have to hit 100% or even 80%. If you are vibing with the company, you think that you would like it or be a good fit, apply anyway, for sure. That is, I think, number one. Then number two is also speculative applications work as well, but spend time on establishing a relationship with the people. Maybe if a company has a podcast or their newsletter or something, or LinkedIn, commenting on people, start building up relationships. That's another thing. And so that when you do send a speculative CV, that actually will be well received. I had it before in my quarter-life crisis. I mean, I became like a professional career changer. I was so persistent as well. There were times when I just had it in my head that I'm going to work for this company. And I had sent off a CV with a really personal cover letter, when I'm like, oh my God, I love the campaign you've done. I love this and this. And, kept on following up with a story or something I thought they found useful. And I had this relationship going with, one of the guys of this company for about a year and a half, so that when a position opened up, he was like, finally, he wrote to me, finally, I've got an opportunity for you to come in and work there. Having those long-term kind of connections is key, but have fun with it. You're not going to, if it feels like a chore, then you're not going to be doing it. So only do that with like 2 or 3 companies or brands that you really want to work for. I see it as a long-term plan. And the other thing to know is that some jobs aren't on jobs boards because, the conversation has, for example, just started in a company about, okay, I think we're going to need to hire someone next year. Let's see what that looks like. And so it's just in conversation form. The job description will be out in the following year. But if you are talking to your friends in your network, or colleagues, you might find out about that job before it's even up. So it's always worth reaching out to your network and saying, I'm looking, or do you know anything? We worked with the client I mentioned before, the one that we wanted to leave a job after 20 years. He had an excellent network. And the first 6 emails that he sent off to his network to say, I'm looking for something, out of those 6, 4 of them replied saying, hang on, let's have a call. And then 2 of them had leads. And then from that, he had interviews in some jobs that weren't even up yet. So it's possible for sure. But those 3 things, I think, are the main ones.
That's incredible. And I really appreciate your sort of short-term and long-term focus there, right? It's like, if there is a dream job that you want, you're probably not going to get it through the job board. You're going to have to put in some longer-term legwork while also keeping an open mind to these shorter-term, opportunities that are popping up. And I think it's keeping like that dual approach of like, and again, going back to like keeping an eye on the future while also doing a good job today, being able to balance those 2 things. And sometimes that's hard. And that's where coaching can maybe help give a bit of a non-biased perspective that isn't your parents and all the baggage that comes with it, right? And so I really appreciate you being here today and sharing these thoughts, Dina. How can folks find out more about you, your work, and anything you have going on?
Yes, thank you so much for having me on this on your podcast. You are such a great listener, honestly.
Thank you.
You're going to be the therapy side when you bring the therapy and the coaching together. When that starts, going to be so powerful. DinaGrishin.com. So that's Dina, D-I-N-A, and with Grishin, Grishin. There, that's my website, and signing up to my newsletter, I think, is the number one thing, because that's like the most real me. I show up for my newsletter all the time. I'm also on Instagram and LinkedIn. LinkedIn, I'm there more often. Instagram, yeah, I'm still figuring out my relationship with it. So my newsletter is the best place to find me for sure.
Wonderful. And we will share all those links in the description below. So check those out. And Dina, thank you for joining us today. Thanks for joining us for today's episode. If you found this conversation to be helpful, please like and subscribe wherever you are listening. We also appreciate it if you take the time to leave us a review on iTunes. It really does help us spread the word and get these ideas out to more job seekers looking to build their careers and improve their lives just like you. If you'd like to learn more about career therapy and see our different coaching options, you can head over to careertherapy.com to learn more. Thank you again for stopping by. We wish you all the best in the future of your career. Have a good one.